Right, so the moment that you are born on this earth, you do not have a lot of options. Now, if you're watching this because you're either depressed or anxious or going through some tough times in life, the good news is that by the end of the videos, not only will I be solving your problem, but you might even become a millionaire. And I mean this quite seriously. So when you are spawned on planet Earth, for the majority of your life, at least from 0 to 18 years old, your neural prefrontal cortex, in other words, your brain, is already preconditioned. This is called classical conditioning in psychology. And so in other words, your belief system or your decision making is basically shaped by your upbringing, by the society's social values, by the religion, by the culture, and by other various external factors. And very often you can't control this, right? And so one of the biggest factor is obviously your raising and your parents, right? And so what happens when you're 18 plus? The sad reality is that nowadays, a lot of young adults, I assume if you are 20 to 30, currently watching this video, you can probably relate, because I have been in this situation many, many times, is that you will face something known as an existential crisis. Also, I do apologize if I'm not writing so well because I'm slightly slanted. I think this is better, existential crisis. So I'm not sure if you can see this, but basically I wrote down here existential crisis. And when you're 18 plus, you are going to face an existential crisis. An existential crisis is also known as a midlife crisis. It's basically the same thing. The only difference is when it happens, the timing. And so the good news is that existential crisis is not essentially a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing, because an existential crisis is a condition or specific phase in your brain. I'll explain this in just a moment now. It's a specific condition in your brain where you self-reflect and you're basically re-evaluating most of the decisions that you make in your life. And that is actually very good. So ignore a lot of the misconception about anxiety, depression, existential crisis, because essentially at its core, it's actually a good thing, because that is where you are finally re-evaluating your decisions and you're trying to reprogram your trajectory of your life. And so these three principles, right, throughout this entire video, is the principles that has shaped, if not the biggest component of my life, and that is my success / my career. Without these three principles, I can almost guarantee you that you will face an existential crisis to the extent that you can't help yourself out. Or in simple words, if you have no purpose or direction in life, if you know these three principles, you can at least move yourself out of that. The first one is the universal currency. I want you guys to understand how the universe works. Now, I've made numerous other videos explaining the specific mechanics of the universe, but for this purpose, for this video, I'm going to keep it very simple. I want you guys to understand that the way the universe works is something like a marketplace, something like a supermarket. I assume you guys have gone to the supermarket, and so there's a specific transaction of value that happens. Like going to a supermarket, you pay for a specific product or item, and so the universe works the same way. And now you might be asking, what is the specific item or product that you are buying for? And that is your future. Because your future is something that has value. Just like the items in the supermarket that has value, your future is the most valuable thing that you will ever face. And now we can break down what consists of your future, but for the sake of the simplicity of this video, we're just going to leave it the way it is. And so I want you guys to re-understand, and I will reinstate this, is that the universe works like a marketplace. And so just imagine you, right, your egos, your personality, your character walks into the supermarket, and then you figure out what is the type of future that I want to build for myself. And just like the supermarket, you have endless of opportunities and options. You can have basically any type of selection, any type of item, and the future is essentially in your hands, as cliche as it sounds. And so the question is, okay, now that I understand the value and the item that I can buy for, what is the thing that I trade it for? right? What is the transaction? What is the thing that I'm giving up? And so in this universe, there's just two specific components that you trade for that will give you your future, and that is time and money. And so the question beholds, what is more precious? Well, it's very complicated, but from my basic understanding and the way I see the world, time is essentially the most important. And very often when you see people buying something or using money, very often they're exchanging time for money, right? And so I want you to understand that the universe works on two fundamental currencies, which is time and money, and you are always either trading your time or you are trading your money. Even you sitting down this YouTube video, you are currently trading time. If you are sitting down playing video games, you are currently trading time. If you are working, if you're employed, you are currently trading money. If you're buying something, you're trading money. And so all that reflects back to what your future, or essentially your value, becomes. Because I want you to understand that you are nothing more, and I'll repeat this very slowly, you are nothing more than the value you contribute to society. And so if you are not valuable in the eyes of society, then no matter how much time and money you can trade in, you are just not seen as a valuable person. And so that is very important for you guys to understand. So just keep this in mind for now. Now, TPN and DMN. Now this is going to be a little bit about neuroscience / biology, but I guarantee you I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not good in science or biology myself, but at least understand the first or basic principles and the fundamentals of how your brain works. And I want you to understand that your brain only ever operates in two modes. So I want you guys, and I'll give you a visual understanding about this, I want you guys to imagine that you are basically Tony Stark, right? Tony Stark has an Iron Man suit, right, where he does all the action, the activities. The Iron Man is the one that gets his hands dirty, is where he defeats all the bad guys. I want you to imagine that Iron Man, right, the metal suit is essentially this, okay? And then Tony Stark has his quiet mode, right, where he's busy, where he's being creative, where he's thinking about the future, about his company, Stark Enterprise, where he's having all these weird imaginations and decisions, etc., etc. This is where he's being Tony Stark. And so the same way, your brain operates always in two modes. And so I want you guys to understand what is the difference between the task positive network mode and the default mode network mode. And so it's essentially two different modes. So the first one, the task positive network mode, is known in simple terms the mode or the operating system where you are getting things done. This is where you are doing something, this is where you are solving a problem, this is where you're completing your assignment, this is where you are, I don't know, solving an accounting equation, this is where you're doing your 9 to 5, sales, marketing, etc., etc. TPN, just like Iron Man, is the mode on where you are actually doing the work. Even as a sportsman myself, TPN is the mode on where I'm playing football. Now, the default mode network mode is known as the resting mode. This is where self-reflection happens. This is where your brain is processing. This is where creative ideas come from. This is where reflection happens. This is where anxiety happens. This is where depression happens. And so you have these two modes. And so now the question is, which mode should I be in all the time? And the answer is, it depends. Because you would want to be in the task positive network mode when you're essentially doing work, when you are playing football, when you're solving an assignment, when you're doing the homework. You don't want to do these type of activities when you're in default mode network mode, because then your brain is just not configured the right way and you will realize you are sluggish, you're slow, you can't complete the activities. You want to fire the TPN mode when it comes to these type of things to get done, right? The default mode, network mode, is where you are resting. This is where you essentially want to recharge your brain. This is where your brain is essentially processing most of the things that it's going through, where you're reflecting on your decisions. This is basically where you are meditating, I like to call it. And so again, as I mentioned earlier to your information, default mode, network mode is where depression and anxiety happens. And so if you're currently depressed or anxious, you're most likely in default mode, network mode. And the reason why I mentioned in the introduction of this video on why depression and anxiety is not a bad thing is because default mode network, if you see it from this perspective, is not a bad thing. There are numerous benefits of being in the default mode network, as I mentioned earlier: reflecting, journaling, creativity, decision making, reflecting on your decisions. Decision making is actually the same thing, but default mode network is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And so, one second, guys. And so when you are resting and when you are relaxed, you would want to go to, or at least plan to eventually get into the TPN mode. And that's why we see nowadays that when you are distracted, when you are given a certain task, when you're asked to do your homework, or when you're asked to solve a specific equation, then you basically reconfigure your brain into the TPN mode. And that's a good thing, because then you're not anxious, you are not self-reflecting, you are not thinking too much. Because during the TPN, I want you to understand that your brain is just task-oriented, it's purely logical, it's analytical. In this mode, your brain is just focused on solving a specific task. And so let's talk about multitasking, because a lot of people get confused. Okay, can I swap? Can I do both at the same time? Is it always only one? And the answer is yes. It's only always one mode in the same time. Just imagine like binary. Just imagine that your brain is biologically or neurologically not possible to have both modes at the same time. Although I must say that the idea of flow, that the idea of flow would touch on both areas. And so the idea of flow, when you're in the state or in the mode, how other people like to say it, you're very often in TPN mode. And so I want you guys to understand that for that,